Hello again, ladies and gentlemen, it's me, and today I want to begin unraveling the very packed question of which game is better, Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom. Now, it's not hard to see that Tears of the Kingdom has more content, as well as a more versatile and creatively used physics system, what with the use of Ultra Hand, and has polished up a lot of things from Breath of the Wild. But do these additions make the game notably better? Well, with two very large and expansive open-world games with dozens of aspects of gameplay and hundreds of hours of content, I don't think it's fair to either game to say that one is objectively better than the other. This video will be the first in a series where I dive into individual aspects of these two games. I'll be comparing to see which is the superior game within the context of these individual aspects. It is my hope that this will reveal what elements of the game Tears of the Kingdom has improved beyond its predecessor, and in what ways it is inferior to Breath of the Wild. And what better place to start than with the starting areas of each game. It may seem odd to some to dedicate a video to analyzing the starting areas of these two games, as you only spend a couple of hours in them, and once you've completed them, there's very little reason to return to either one in the rest of your playthrough. But this is also the beginning of your playthrough. It's likely your first impression of what it's like to play whichever given Zelda game you've picked up. So while in retrospect each may seem like routine tutorial regions, at one time they were all you knew of the game. And that's why we're starting here. So I replayed both of these starting areas, and this is what I found. First of all, both of these starting areas follow more or less the same basic design. They start you with having to reach some location. In Breath of the Wild, you need to reach a Sheikah Tower, and in Tears of the Kingdom, it's the Sky Island Light Temple. Along the way, you'll encounter your first enemies, learn about weapon durability, and get introduced to the climbing mechanic. After that, you meet with some dead guy and then have to go to find 4 shrines. These shrines introduce you to the mechanics of the 4 core runes of each game, while simultaneously plunging you into the puzzle mechanics of the shrines, which will be a key aspect of the gameplay for both games. Along the way to these different shrines, you encounter more kinds of enemies, such as the Stall enemies in Breath of the Wild, and constructs with fused weapons in Tears of the Kingdom. You're also introduced to environmental damage with cold regions, and may or may not learn about cooking food. Neither game does a great job of explaining cooking or how to get cold res, but that's a minor flaw. After completing the 4 shrines and returning to the temple, you gain either your first extra heart container or your first extra stamina bar. In Breath of the Wild, it's dealer's choice. In Tears of the Kingdom, you're stuck with a heart container. After that, the tutorial is complete. You're given a linear main quest to lead you towards some important location, which itself will branch into the more non-linear gameplay down the line. So with so much overlap in the approach to both of these starter areas, is there really enough difference to compare and contrast the two? Absolutely. At a first glance, the simplest difference between these two areas is their aesthetic. The aesthetic of both starting areas is fantastic, but in different and important ways. Breath of the Wild starts you out on the Great Plateau, from which you overlook a vast section of the ruined Hyrule, with a massive volcano and a corrupted castle in the distance. The view when you first exit the Shrine of Resurrection is breathtaking, and this continues to be the case throughout the starting area. The plateau itself contains various ruins, evoking a wondrous yet melancholy vibe. Tears of the Kingdom takes a different approach and starts you on a sky island. And let's be honest, who doesn't love sky islands? Massive chunks of land suspended thousands of feet in the air is a great look. The isle is bathed in yellows and greens like it's early autumn. It also displays the Zonai tech in the form of the various constructs throughout the island. Now, while which of these aesthetics is better is a matter of opinion, there's an important difference to note between the two. Breath of the Wild's aesthetic gives you a fairly good idea for how the game will feel as a whole. The wondrous yet vaguely sad feeling that permeates the game is noticeable from the very beginning. Tears of the Kingdom starts you in the Sky Islands. While the Sky Islands in Tears of the Kingdom are packed with content, there aren't actually that many of them, as the sky is mostly still, well, the sky. There's very little landmass up there. The tutorial region in Tears doesn't give you as good of an idea for what the rest of the game will be like. Turning away from appearances, let's look at the gameplay from each region. Apart from the runes, the gameplay is fairly similar. You'll be fighting roughly equivalent enemies for the most part, and start with a similar quality of gear. But once again, Breath of the Wild does something with this formula that Tears of the Kingdom doesn't. Breath contains two particular enemies that are far too difficult for a first-time player with low-level gear to deal with. The Forest of Spirits on the north side of the plateau is home to a stone talus, which can, with some of its attacks, comfortably one-shot Link. It has a respectable amount of health and is invulnerable to any attack that doesn't target its weak spot, which is hard to reach. Likewise, the half-broken guardians surrounding one of the shrines also one-shot Link and have an absurd amount of health. While these enemies may be considered unfair at first, they teach you something very important about Breath of the Wild that Tears of the Kingdom's starting area does not. Both of these games are open world, and you can go anywhere in the kingdom from very early in the game. However, this will mean that some, if not most players, will enter dangerous and high-level regions before they're ever equipped to deal with the enemies found there. Breath of the Wild teaches you in its tutorial region that you can't always take a head-on fight. Sometimes it's better to sneak around or even flee from powerful enemies. It can be annoying at first, but learning this lesson can improve the player's gameplay experience for the rest of their playthrough. Tears doesn't do this. There are some more difficult camps of enemies in the starting area, but there aren't any that you can't feasibly beat. The hardest enemy here is a flux construct, which is more of a puzzle than a typical battle, and can feasibly be beat with some patience, even with starting gear. It's not that Tears of the Kingdom's starting region is bad, but it misses the chance to teach the player about this aspect of the game. A third major difference between each of these starting areas is the sense of reward associated with each one. From early in Breath of the Wild's tutorial, it's made clear that once you finish the tutorial area, you'll get the paraglider. The starter region is mountainous, with many steep cliffs both within and on the borders of the region. It is clear to you how useful this item will be, and you look forward to obtaining it. It's a great reward for completing the starting area. Tears doesn't have this sense of reward. Not only do you not obtain the paraglider until later in the game, but there isn't really a reward for completing the starting area. Sure, it's exciting to complete it and the whole world is suddenly open to you, but there's something missing here that Breath of the Wild did just right. That's pretty much all the differences between these two areas, but there is one final thing that bugged me about Tears of the Kingdom's starting area. Both starting areas serve as a tutorial for the game as a whole. However, Tears of the Kingdom also has a short prologue area, which is abundant with cutscenes that help set up the game's plot. It's got some spooky vibes, and does a good job of beginning the story, but it also serves as a mini tutorial, which teaches you how to move, attack, and control the camera. If it weren't for the starting area to follow, this would be a more than warranted section of the beginning of the game. But as it is, it serves as a tutorial before the tutorial. This was, at least for me, rather frustrating. This starting segment could have just as easily been reduced to just the cutscenes, without any loss. Instead, the section drags out the learning phase of the game unnecessarily by teaching the player aspects of the game that they would have figured out within a couple minutes of the starting area anyway. Tears' starting area is already longer than Breath's. I replayed each of these starting areas before making this video, and while Breath of the Wild's start took 1 hour and 5 minutes, Tears took over an hour and a half once you add in the prologue. Adding more to the beginning of the starting area drags it out unnecessarily. Now, as we wrap this up, I know I've down-talked Tears of the Kingdom's starting area quite a bit here. Understand that this does not represent my feelings on the game as a whole. I love both these games. The whole point of splitting up the different aspects of each game and analyzing them independently is so that we can see where each game excels and where they fall short. I wouldn't be so critical of either of these games if it weren't for the fact that I hold a lot of affection for both. In conclusion, however, Breath of the Wild does have a better starting area than Tears. Tears drags out the learning aspect of the game unnecessarily and fails to properly represent the aesthetic and emotional feeling of the rest of the game. Breath, on the other hand, does a better job of establishing the overall feeling of the game. It warns players about the high-level enemies that they could run into before they're ready to deal with them, and it rewards the players for completing the quest associated with the starting area. Regardless of whichever game is better, Breath of the Wild has a better starting area.